Hello, I'm Jay, and this is Relax with Jay. I create calming videos that allow you to relax and or drift off to sleep. If you enjoy my videos and find them helpful, please hit the like button, subscribe, and click on the notification bell. I hope you enjoyed this video and may it bring you restful sleep. Tonight, I'll be reading the first part of the story called The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving. If you enjoyed this part and would like me to read more, please let me know. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving. Castle of Indolence. In the bosom of one of those spacious coves which intend the eastern shore of the Hudson, at the broad expansion of the river denominated by the ancient Dutch navigators and the Tappan Zee, and where they always prudently shortened sail and implored the protection of St. Nicholas when they crossed, there lies a small market town or rural port, which by some is called Greenburg, but which is more generally and probably known by the name of Tarrytown. This name was given, we are told, in former days by the good housewives of the adjacent country, from the inveterate propensity of their husbands to linger about the village tavern on market days. Be that as it may, I do not vouch for the fact, but mere advert to that it for the sake of being precise and authentic. Not far from this village, perhaps about 2 miles, there is a little valley, or rather lap of land among high hills, which is one of the quietest places in the world. A small brook glides through it with just murmur enough to lull one to repose, and the occasional whistle of crow or tapping of a woodpecker is almost the only sound that ever breaks in upon the uniform contrariety. I recollect that when a stripling, my first exploit in squirrel shooting was in a grove of tall walnut trees that shades one side of the valley. I had wandered into it at noontime, when all nature is peculiarly quiet, and was startled by the roar of my own gun as it broke the Sabbath stillness around and was prolonged and reverberated by the angry echoes. If I ever should wish for a retreat whither I might steal from the world and its distractions, and dream quietly away the remnant of the troubled life, I know of none more promising than this little valley. From the listless repose of the place and the peculiar character of its inhabitant, who are descendants from the original Dutch settlers, this sequestered glen has long been known by the name of Sleepy Hollow, and its rustic lads are called the Sleepy Hollow Boys. Throughout all neighboring country, a drowsy, dreamy influence seemed to hang over the land and to pervade the very atmosphere. Some say that the place was bewitched by a high German doctor, and during the early days of the settlement, others that an old Indian chief, the prophet or wizard of his tribe, held his powwows there before the country was discovered by Master Hendrik Hudson. Certainly it is, the place still continues under the sway of some witching power that holds a spell over the minds of the good people, causing them to walk in continual revelry. They are given to all kinds of marvelous beliefs, are subjects to trenches and visions, and frequently see strange sights and hear music and voices in the air. The rural neighborhood abounds with the local tales, haunted spots, and twilight superstitions. Star shoots and meteor glare oftener across the valley than in any other part of the country, and the nightmare with her all ninefold seems to make it the favorite scene of her gambols. The dominant spirit, however, that haunts this enchanted region and seems to be commander-in-chief of all powers of the air is the apparition of the figure on horseback. Without a head, it is said by some of the ghosts of the Harrison trooper, whose head and had been carried away by a cannonball in some nameless battle during the Revolution War, and who is ever and anon seen by the country folks hurrying along in the gloom of night, as if on the wings of the wind. His hunts are not confined to the valley, but extend at times to the adjacent roads, and especially to the vicinity of a church at no great distance. Indeed, certain of the most authentic historians of all those parts, who have been careful in collecting and collating the floating facts concerning this figure, allege that the body of the trooper having been buried in the churchyard, the ghost rides forth to the scene of battle in nightly quest of his head, and that the rushing speed with which he sometimes passes along the hollow like a midnight blast is owing to his being belated and in a hurry to get back to the churchyard before daybreak. Such is the general purport of this legendary superstition, which has furnished materials for many a wild story in that region of shadows, and the spectre is known at all the country firesides by the name of the Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow. It is remarkable that the visionary propensity I have mentioned is not confined to the native inhabitants of the valley, but it is unconsciously imbedded by everyone who resides there for a time. However wide awake they may have been before they entered that sleepy region, they are sure in a little time to inhale the witching influence of the air and begin to grow imaginative, to dream and see apparitions. I mention this peaceful spot with all possible loud, for it is in such little retired Dutch valleys, found here and there, embosomed in the great state of New York, that population manners and custom remain fixed, while the great torrent of migration and improvement, which is making such insensate changes in other parts of this restless country, sweeps by them unobserved. They are like those little hooks of still water which border a rapid stream, where we may see the straw and the bubble riding quietly at anchor or slowly revolving in their michaber, undisturbed by the rush of passing currents. Though many years have elapsed since I trod the drowsy shades of Sleepy Hollow, yet I question whether I should not still find the same trees and the same families vegetating in its sheltered bosom. In this byplace of nature there abode, in a remote period of American history, that is to say, some 30 years since, a worthy wait of the name of Ichabod Crane, who sojourned, or, as he expressed it, tarried in Sleepy Hollow, for the purpose of instructing the children of the vicinity. He was a native of Connecticut, a state which supplies the Union with pioneers of the mind as well as for the forest, and sends forth yearly its legions of frontier woodmen and country schoolmasters. The cognomen of Crane was not inapplicable to his person. He was tall but exceedingly lank, with narrow shoulders, long arms and legs, hands that dangled a mile out of his sleeve, feet that might have served for shovels, and his whole frame most loosely hung together. His head was small and flat at top, with huge ears, large green glassy eyes, and a long snipe nose, so that it looked like a weather crook perched upon his spindly neck to tell which way the wind flew. To see him striding along the profile of a hill on a windy day, with his clothes bagging and fluttering about him, one might have mistaken him for the genius of famine descending upon the earth, or some scarecrow eloped from a cornfield. His schoolhouse was a low building of one large room, rudely constructed of logs, the windows partly glazed and partly patched with leaves of old copybooks. It was mostly ingeniously secured at vacant hours by wit twisted in the handle of the door and stakes set against the window shutters, so that though a thief might get in with perfect ease, he would find some embarrassment in getting out, an idea most probable borrowed by the architect, Joost Jan van Host, from The Mysterious of the Eelpot. The schoolhouse stood in a rather lonely but pleasant situation, just at the foot of a windy hill, with a brook running close by and a formidable beech tree growing one end of it. From hence the low murmur of his people's voices, conning over their lessons, might be heard in a drowsy summer's day, like the hum of a beehive, interrupted now and then by the authoritative voice of the master, in the tone of a menace or command, or peradventure by the appalling sound of the birch, as he urged some tardy loiterer along the flowery path of knowledge. Truth to say, he was a conscientious man, and ever bore in mind the golden maxim, spare the rod and spoil the child. Ichabod Crane's scholars certainly were not spoiled. I would not have imagined it, however, that he was one of those cruel protestants of the school who joy in the smarts of their subjects. On the contrary, he administered justice with discrimination rather than severity, taking the burden off the backs of the weak and laying it on those of the strong. Your more penny stripling, those whence at the least flourish of the rod, was passing by with indulgence, but the claim of justice was satisfied by the inflicting a double portion on some little tough, wrong-headed, broad-skirted Dutch urchin, who sculled and squealed and grew dogged and swollen beneath the birch. All this he called doing his duty by their parents, and he never inflicted a chastity without following it by the assurance, so consolatory to the smartened urchin, that he would remember it and thank him for it the longest day he had to live. When the school hours were over, he was even the companion and playmate of the larger boys, and on holiday afternoons would convoy some of the smaller ones home, who happened to have pretty sisters or good housewives for mothers, noted for the comforts of the cupboard. Indeed, it was behooved him to keep on good terms with his pupils. The revenue arising from his school was small, and would have been scarcely sufficient to furnish him with daily bread, for he was a huge feeder, and though lank, had the delighting powers of an anaconda. But to help out his maintenance, he was, according to country custom in those parts, boarded and lodged at the houses of the farmers whose children he instructed. With these he lived successfully a week at a time, thus coming the rounds of the neighborhood with all his worldly effects tied up in a cotton handkerchief.